I died convinced God had made a mistake putting us together, and came back understanding what I'd been refusing to see. For years, I believed I understood my husband. I believed I knew what our marriage needed. And then I died and saw the truth I had been blind to all along. This is what happened in that sacred space between life and death. My name is Miriam Elise Tanner. I am 44 years old. I live in Auckland, New Zealand. And on August 19, 2019, my heart stopped for 21 minutes. But before I tell you what I saw on the other side, I need to tell you what I was carrying into that moment. Because the truth is, I did not arrive at that hospital bed by accident. I arrived there by years of choices. Years of a particular kind of pride that I had dressed up so carefully. I genuinely could not see it for what it was. Joel and I met in our early 30s. He was quiet, steady, the kind of man who remembered small things, the way you take your tea, the song that made you cry once at a wedding, the name of your childhood dog. He was not flashy. He was not loud. He did not walk into rooms and own them. He walked into rooms and found the person standing alone in the corner and made them feel like the only person there. That was Joel. That was always Joel. And in the beginning, I loved that about him. I did. I want to be honest about that. Because it would be easy to make this story about a bad marriage from the start. It was not. There were years, real, warm, genuine years, where I looked at this man and felt something settle in my chest. Something that said, "This is home." But somewhere around year 3, a small voice started. Quiet at first. Almost reasonable. "He should be further along by now. Your colleague's husband just got promoted again. Why is he still content with the same position he had when you married him?" I did not recognize that voice for what it was. I thought it was discernment. I thought it was wisdom. I thought God had given me vision for our family, and Joel simply needed me to help him see it. So I started helping. Small comments first. Gentle ones. The kind that sound like encouragement if you say them fast enough, and do not linger on the expression that crosses your husband's face after you say them. "You are so capable, Joel. I just think you could push harder. I saw Marcus got a promotion. Have you thought about speaking to your manager? I read this book about high performers. I left it on your nightstand. I really think it could help you." Help. That was the word I used. Always help. I was helping him become better. I was helping him reach his potential. I was helping our family build something stronger. That was the story I told myself every single time, and I told it so many times. I forgot it was a story. What I did not see, what I refused to see, was what those words were doing to him over time. Not all at once. Not in one dramatic moment. But slowly. The way water finds the smallest crack in a wall and works at it, season after season, until one morning, the wall is simply gone. Joel stopped sharing his ideas with me around year 4. I noticed, but I told myself he was just tired. Joel stopped singing in the kitchen around year 5. I noticed, but I told myself he was going through a quiet season. Joel stopped reaching for my hand during church around year 6. I noticed. I told myself nothing that time. I just felt a coldness move through me, and then I pushed it down and focused on the sermon. I was so focused on the man I believed Joel should become. I did not notice the man he actually was slowly, quietly disappearing. By year 7, our home had a particular kind of silence in it. Not the peaceful kind. Not the comfortable quiet of two people who have known each other long enough that words are not always necessary. This was the other kind. The kind that has weight. The kind you feel pressing against your chest when you sit across from someone at dinner and realize you have not had a real conversation in weeks. We talked. Of course we talked. About the grocery list. About whose turn it was to service the car. About whether we needed a new water heater. We were functional. We were polite. We had become extraordinarily polite strangers who shared a mortgage and a bed and a set of matching towels. And I blamed him for that. I want you to understand how completely I blamed him. It was not a partial blame. It was not a blame I questioned late at night. It was a settled, certain, righteous conviction that Joel's lack of drive, his contentment with smallness, his refusal to become who I needed him to be, had stolen the marriage I deserved. I had given him everything. My energy, my vision, my standards. I had pushed and planned and positioned us toward a better life. And what had he given me in return? Silence. Passivity. A man who came home, ate dinner, watched the news, and went to bed like life was simply something that happened to you rather than something you built. That was what I believed. Completely. Unshakably. And then came the phone call. It was a Tuesday evening. My sister Grace called from Wellington, the way she did every few weeks, and somewhere in the middle of the conversation, she mentioned that her husband David had just been made a regional director. And something in me cracked. Not broke. Cracked. The way a plate cracks before it shatters, that moment just before, where everything holds its breath. I said the right words to Grace. Congratulations. How wonderful. You must be so proud. And then I hung up the phone. And I walked to the kitchen where Joel was washing dishes, his back to me, humming something low under his breath the way he always did when he thought no one was listening. And I said, I do not even remember exactly how I said it. I know my voice was controlled. I know I thought I was being calm. But the words that came out were something like, Grace called. David made regional director. I just thought you should know that people who started where you started are not all still standing in the same place. Joel stopped humming. He did not turn around immediately. He just stopped. Set the dish down carefully. And then he turned and looked at me with eyes that I will never forget as long as I live. Not angry eyes. Not wounded eyes. Empty ones. Like something had finally run out. He said nothing. He dried his hands. He walked past me down the hallway. And I heard the bedroom door close. Quietly. That was the worst part. He did not slam it. He closed it the way you close a door when you have accepted something, and you no longer have the energy to protest it. I stood in that kitchen alone. And instead of going after him, instead of feeling what was sitting right beneath the surface of my chest trying to get my attention, I turned back to the counter and I started making tomorrow's lunch. My hands were shaking. My vision had started blurring at the edges. I thought it was anger. I thought it was frustration. I did not know it was my blood pressure. I did not know what was coming. I did not know that in 40 minutes, I would be on the floor of our bathroom and Joel would be screaming my name. I do not remember falling. That is the part nobody tells you about. You imagine that a moment like that would be dramatic. That you would feel it coming. That your body would give you some kind of warning, a sharp pain, a sudden dizziness, something that announces itself. But it was not like that. One moment I was standing at the bathroom sink, water running, staring at my own reflection without really seeing it. And the next moment, the floor came up to meet me. And then there was nothing. No pain. No sound. No Joel's voice, though I know now he was screaming. No beeping machines, though I know they came later. Just nothing. A nothing that was not empty. That is the only way I can describe it. It was a nothing that felt full. Waiting. Like the held breath before a word is spoken. And then warmth. Not the warmth of a room or a blanket. Deeper than that. The kind of warmth that does not come from outside you but rises from somewhere inside your chest, the way relief does when something you have been afraid of for a long time is finally over. I felt it move through me slowly, from the center outward, and with it came a loosening. Like every muscle I had been holding tight for 9 years, simply let go. I was not afraid. That surprised me more than anything else. I had always assumed that dying would feel like terror. Like falling from a great height with nothing beneath you. But it did not feel like falling at all. It felt like being set down, gently, by hands that knew exactly where to place you. I became aware of light before I became aware of anything else. Not harsh light. Not the fluorescent white of a hospital corridor. This was the color of late afternoon in autumn, that particular gold that comes just before the sun drops below the horizon, when everything it touches looks like it is being seen for the last time and the first time simultaneously. It fell across everything softly. And in that light I began to see where I was. I was standing at the edge of a field. And in the center of that field was a tree. I knew immediately it was our tree. I cannot explain how I knew. There was no sign. No voice told me. But the knowing was absolute, the way you recognize your own handwriting or the smell of your childhood home. It was our tree. Mine and Joel's. And it was enormous. The kind of tree that has been growing for longer than you can measure, with roots that have gone so deep into the earth that nothing above the ground could threaten what is anchored beneath. I walked toward it slowly. The grass beneath my feet was soft. Real. I could feel it. I could feel the slight give of the earth, the coolness of the air against my skin, a gentle wind moving through the field that carried something with it, something that smelled like old wood and rain and, faintly, like the soap Joel used every morning. That detail undid me. I stopped walking for a moment. Just stood there in the middle of that field and breathed in the smell of my husband's soap, in a place between life and death, and something in my chest split open quietly. I kept walking. When I reached the tree, I placed my hand against the bark. And I felt it before I saw it. The texture was wrong in places. Rough where it should have been smooth. Scarred. I stepped back and looked up at the trunk, and I saw them. Our initials. M and J, carved inside a heart, the way Joel had done it on our second anniversary at a park near our first flat. He had been so proud of himself. He had covered my eyes with his hands and walked me to it, and when he moved his hands away, and I saw what he had done, I had laughed. A real laugh. The kind that comes from your whole body. But the carving on this tree had changed. The heart around the initials had been carved over. Not destroyed. Not erased. But overlaid with other marks, deep, repeated lines running across it, like something had been pressing against that spot for years. Not cutting. Pressing. The way you press your thumb into a bruise without meaning to. Over and over. Without realizing what you are doing to the thing beneath your hand. I traced those marks with my fingers. And the moment I touched them, the tree showed me something. I do not have a better word for it than that. The bark beneath my palm grew warm, and images began to surface through it the way photographs develop in a darkroom, slowly at first, then with gathering clarity. I was not watching them from a distance. I was inside them, present in each one. But I was seeing them differently than I had lived them. I was seeing them from where Joel had been standing. The first memory surfaced like this. Our kitchen table, a Wednesday evening, Joel spreading papers across it with the careful excitement of someone who has been thinking about something for a long time and has finally found the courage to share it. A business idea. Something he had been quietly researching for months. He was talking. I could see his hands moving the way they always did when he was genuinely animated about something. That particular aliveness that came into his face when something mattered to him. And then I watched myself enter the frame. I sat down across from him. I looked at the papers. And I watched my own mouth begin to move. I could not hear the words from where I stood inside this memory. But I did not need to. I could see Joel's hands slow down. I could see the aliveness drain from his face. Not quickly, not dramatically, but the way a tide goes out. Steadily. Without announcement. until the table was just papers, and he was just a man sitting across from a woman who had just told him, in some careful and reasonable and utterly devastating way, that his dream was not practical. I pulled my hand from the bark. I was breathing hard. Or whatever the equivalent of breathing hard is when you no longer have a body. My whole being was shaking, because I remembered that evening. I remembered it clearly, and in my memory of it, I had been helping him. I had been protecting us from an impractical risk. I had been the responsible one. But what I had just watched was not help. It was the slow, patient, well-intentioned extinguishing of a light. And that had not been the first time. The tree knew that. The tree was showing me that. Because before I could step back, before I could gather myself, another memory surfaced through the bark without me even touching it. And then another. And another. Each one a different evening, a different conversation, a different version of the same moment. Joel reaching toward me with something real and alive in his hands, and me, with all my vision and all my standards and all my certainty about what our life should look like. Taking it from him. Quietly. Reasonably. Every single time. I sank to my knees at the base of that tree. Not dramatically. Not with a cry. I just went down. The way you go down when something true lands on you and your legs simply cannot hold the weight of it anymore. I knelt in the grass at the base of our tree, and I pressed my forehead against the bark, and I wept. Not the weeping of self-pity. Not the weeping of someone who feels wrongly accused. The weeping of someone who has just seen themselves clearly for the first time in 9 years, and does not recognize what they are looking at. Lord, I have to stop here for a second. Because even now, telling this, my hands are trembling. I want to pray for someone watching this right now, because I know you are there. I know some of you are sitting with this the way I was kneeling at that tree, not sure if what you are feeling is grief or guilt or both. And I want to speak to you directly. Lord, for the person watching this who feels like I did, who has been so certain for so long that the problem in their home is sitting across the table from them, who has dressed their control up as vision, and their criticism up as care, and their contempt up as standards. Lord, I am asking you right now to do what that tree did for me. Let them see. Not to crush them. Not to condemn them. But to free them. Because the truth, as painful as it is the only thing that can save what they're about to lose. Father, soften what has gone hard. Open what has gone closed. And give them the courage to kneel the way I knelt, and let it change them. In Jesus' name. Amen. I do not know how long I knelt there. Time does not move the same way in that place. There is no clock. No pressure of the next thing. Just the moment you are in, fully, with nowhere else to be, and no way to escape what it is asking of you. And what that moment was asking of me was to stay. To not get up too quickly. To not organize what I had just seen into something more manageable. To let it be as large as it actually was. So I stayed. And after a while, after the weeping had moved through me and left something quieter in its place, I became aware that I was not alone. I felt the presence before I saw anything. A warmth that was distinct from the general warmth of the place. More directed. More personal. Like the difference between sunlight on your skin and a hand placed gently on your shoulder. I looked up slowly from the base of the tree. Standing a few feet away was a figure. I cannot give you dimensions or describe a face with any precision. That is not how it worked. What I can tell you is this: the figure carried something. In both hands, held carefully, the way you carry something fragile and irreplaceable. A collection of folded papers. Many of them. Some looked old, worn at the edges, soft from handling. Others looked newer. But all of them had the same quality. They had been held often. Returned to again and again. I knew without being told what they were. They were Joel's prayers. Not a metaphor. Not a symbol I had to interpret. I simply knew, With the same absolute certainty I had known the tree was ours, that what this figure was carrying was every prayer my husband had prayed for me. For us. For our marriage. Over 9 years. There were so many of them. That detail broke something in me that the tree had only cracked. Because I had actually told myself more than once that Joel was not a spiritual leader. That he did not take our covenant seriously. That I was the one holding the spiritual weight of our home. I had believed that. I had used it as evidence. Another item on the long list of his insufficiencies. And here was an angel, because that is what I understood this figure to be, carrying 9 years of my husband's prayers for me like they were the most precious thing in that entire realm. The figure spoke. The voice was not loud. It did not need to be. In that place, sound does not have to compete with anything. You have been building a case against him since the beginning. But he has been building a life with you. I opened my mouth. I do not know what I intended to say. The figure continued before I could. Every prayer he prayed for you, you answered with disappointment. I felt those words land somewhere beneath language. Below thought. In the place where you keep the things you cannot argue with, because you already know they are true. And I did know. In that moment, with those folded papers in front of me, I knew. Every time Joel had come home and tried quietly, in his understated way, to connect with me, to offer something, to reach across the distance I had built with my expectations. I had measured what he offered against what I had decided he should offer. And found it lacking. Every time. The figure looked at me with something that was not pity and not judgment. It was closer to the look a doctor gives you when they are about to tell you something difficult, but necessary. Compassionate. Direct. The man you want him to be is not who I made him to be. And what I made him to be has always been enough. The ground shifted beneath me when I heard that. Not literally. But in the way that happens when a framework you have been standing on your entire adult life reveals itself to be built on sand. I had spent 9 years trying to renovate Joel. Trying to expand him, accelerate him, improve him. And not once, had I asked God what he had actually made Joel for. Not once had I sat still long enough to consider that the man I kept trying to change might be exactly who he was supposed to be. And that my inability to receive that was not his failure. It was mine. The figure set the prayers down carefully at the base of the tree. All of them. 9 years of them, resting against the roots. And then it looked at me one final time. Go back. And this time, let him finish his sentences. Such a small thing to say. Such a precise, surgical, devastating thing to say. Because I knew exactly what it meant. How many times had I finished Joel's sentences for him, not out of intimacy but out of impatience? How many times had he begun to speak, and I had already moved ahead of him, already decided what he was going to say, already formulated my response before he had finished the thought. I had stolen his voice from him one interrupted sentence at a time. And I had called it efficiency. The field began to change around me as the figure stepped back. The light shifted. Not darkened. Shifted, the way it does just before dawn when the quality of the darkness changes and you know, even before you see it, that something is coming. The tree above me stirred. And I looked up at the branches on my side, stripped bare, as I had first seen them, and watched, slowly, with the particular slowness of something that has been waiting a long time for permission, the faintest green beginning to appear at the tips. Not full leaves. Not yet. Just the beginning of them. The possibility of them. And then the warmth that had held me through everything in that place gathered itself and moved through me like a current, and I understood what was happening. I was not ready to leave. I want to say that plainly. I was not ready. There was more I wanted to see, more I wanted to understand, more time I wanted to spend at the base of that tree absorbing what it had shown me. But you do not negotiate that kind of return. You simply go. The field contracted around me. The tree grew smaller, or I grew further from it, I cannot say which. The golden light folded inward. And in the last moment before everything changed, I looked at those folded prayers at the base of the roots, and I made a promise. Not out loud, not in words, but in the deepest, most unambiguous part of whatever I am beneath all the noise and pride and certainty I had accumulated over 44 years. I promised I would come back different. And then the cold hit me like a wall. Not the cold of death, the cold of a hospital room. Tile floors and recycled air, and the sharp antiseptic smell that gets into the back of your throat. Sound returned before sight, machines, voices urgent and overlapping, a name being called that took me a moment to recognize as my own. And then air. Violent, involuntary, my lungs contracting and expanding without my permission, my body reclaiming itself with the graceless urgency of something that has been waiting, and I choked on the first breath the way newborns do. And I heard a voice directly above me say, she's back, get the team, and beneath all of that, beneath the machines and the instructions and the cold hands moving efficiently across my body, I heard Joel. Not words. Not a sentence, just a sound. The sound a person makes when something they thought they had lost is suddenly, impossibly, returned to them. A sound that lives below language. I had never heard Joel make that sound before. In 9 years of marriage, I had never once heard him sound like that. And I understood, in the first conscious seconds of being alive again, that I had never truly known the depth of what I had been given. Until I almost lost it forever. The first thing I saw clearly was the ceiling. White. Flat. A single fluorescent light above me with one of those plastic covers that collect dust at the edges. I stared at it for a long time. Not because it was interesting. Because I needed something ordinary to hold on to while everything inside me was still reorganizing itself. Still trying to reconcile the woman who had left that bathroom floor with whatever I was now. My throat hurt. My chest felt like someone had pressed both palms against my sternum and pushed. Every breath was an effort. Not a painful one, just deliberate. Like my lungs were relearning something they had been doing automatically for 44 years and needed to be reminded of the rhythm. A nurse noticed my eyes were open. She said my name. She checked something on the monitor above my head and leaned close and said, "You're okay. You're with us. Just breathe. Just breathe." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Because breathing had just become the most significant thing I had ever done. Every single breath felt like a decision. Like a gift I was being handed one at a time and asked to receive. I turned my head slowly to the right. Joel was sitting in a chair against the wall. He had not seen me turn yet. He was leaning forward with his elbows on his knees and his face in his hands, and he was completely still in the way that people are still when they have been terrified for a long time and the body has simply used everything up. His shirt was the same one he had been wearing in the kitchen. There was a mark on the knee of his trousers where he had clearly been kneeling on the hospital floor at some point. He had been kneeling on a hospital floor for me. A nurse touched his shoulder. He looked up. And then he saw me. I want to be careful here. Because what happened in Joel's face in that moment is not something I have the right words for. It was not simple relief. It was not just happiness. It was the expression of a man who had been sitting in a room for hours making private, desperate agreements with God, the kind where you offer everything you have just to get one thing back, and had just been told the answer was yes. He was across the room before I could say anything. He did not grab me. He did not pull me into some dramatic embrace. He sat on the edge of the bed beside me, and he took my hand in both of his, and he pressed it against his mouth, and he stayed there. Eyes closed. Just holding my hand against his lips. Breathing. I felt the warmth of his hands, and I thought about those folded papers at the base of the tree. 9 years of them. worn at the edges from being returned to again and again. And I started to cry. Quietly. The tears just came, without drama, the way rain sometimes starts, not with a storm but with a single drop, and then another, until you realize it has been raining for a while and you simply did not notice when it began. Joel looked up when he felt my hand trembling. He said, Hey, I'm here. You're okay. And I looked at him, this quiet, steady, unhurried man who had driven me to fury for 9 years with his stillness, and I said the first true thing I had said to him in longer than I could remember. I am so sorry, Joel. He shook his head immediately, the way you do when you want to absolve someone. You don't have to. I do. My voice was rough. Thin. I do. Please. Let me say it. He stopped. He looked at me. And for the first time in 9 years, he waited. And I spoke. And he let me finish every single sentence. That conversation in the hospital lasted 4 hours. I know that sounds like an exaggeration. It is not. Joel did not leave that room. He did not check his phone. He did not grow restless or glance toward the door. He sat on the edge of that bed and he listened to me the way I had never allowed him to listen to me before completely. And I talked. About everything. About the phone call with Grace. About the kitchen. About the years of comparisons I had dressed up as encouragement. About the evening I had watched him spread his business papers across the table and I had, with surgical efficiency, folded his dream back up and handed it to him as a risk assessment. When I said that last part, Joel went very quiet. He looked down at our hands. And he said, almost to himself, I never tried again after that night. I have to stop here for a second. Because that sentence, those 7 words, they have stayed with me every day since. I never tried again after that night. Not because he stopped dreaming, but because he stopped believing that his dreams were safe with me. And he had made that decision quietly, without announcement, without an argument, without giving me the chance to defend myself. He had simply looked at the evidence over 4 years and reached a conclusion. And gone silent. That is the thing about the slow damage. It does not announce itself. There is no single moment you can point to and say, that is where it broke. It is 1,000 small moments. 1,000 redirected sentences. 1,000 expressions you did not notice because you were already moving on to your next point. And one day you look up and the person across from you has learned, very thoroughly, that certain parts of themselves are not welcome in the room when you are in it. I asked Joel that night if I could read his journal. He had kept one for years. I had known about it. I had never asked to read it, partly out of respect for his privacy, partly, I think now, because some part of me knew that what was in it might require something of me I was not ready to give. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he nodded. He went home that night, came back the next morning, and set it on the table beside my hospital bed without a word. I read it over 2 days. I am not going to share what was in it specifically, because some things belong only to a marriage. But I will tell you this. There was not a single entry in that journal that was cruel about me. Not one. There were entries that were honest, painfully honest, about what our home felt like from where he was standing. About the loneliness of being managed by someone who loved you. About the specific grief of watching your wife look at you and see a project rather than a person. About the prayers he prayed late at night, when I was asleep, asking God to either change him into who I needed or change me into someone who could love who he was. He had prayed that prayer for 9 years. 9 years of asking God to fix the distance between us. And the answer had been a bathroom floor in Auckland on a Tuesday evening in August. I wept through most of that journal. Not performing grief. Actually grieving. The specific, irreversible grief of understanding clearly what you cost someone during years you cannot get back. When I was discharged from the hospital 4 days later, Joel brought me home. He had cleaned the bathroom. He had put fresh flowers on the kitchen table, not expensive ones, just the small yellow ones from the supermarket that he knew I had always liked and never mentioned anymore because I had stopped mentioning small things like that years ago. I stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at those flowers, and I understood something about love that no sermon had ever taught me. Love does not always look like grand gestures. Sometimes love looks like a man who has been quietly devastated for 9 years, still buying you the flowers you forgot you loved. We started counseling 3 weeks after I came home. A Christian counselor named Bev, who worked out of a small office near the waterfront in Auckland, who had bookshelves that went from floor to ceiling and a box of tissues on every available surface, like she had learned to be ready. We went every week for 11 months. And it was hard. I want to say that plainly because I think sometimes people hear, "We got counseling," and imagine a montage of breakthrough moments. It was not a montage. It was 11 months of sitting in an honest room and learning to tell the truth without weaponizing it. Learning to hear the truth without defending against it. Learning that vulnerability is not weakness, it is the only door that leads anywhere real. We are still in Auckland. Joel still has that quiet steadiness that used to drive me to distraction. But something has changed in how I receive it. What I used to call passivity, I now recognize as peace. A man who does not need to be the loudest person in the room. A man who makes the person standing alone in the corner feel like the only person there. I fell in love with that quality once. And then I spent 9 years trying to renovate it out of him. I will not do that again. Now, I need to speak directly to you. Because I did not share this testimony for people to sit with it comfortably. I shared it because I know you are out there. I know some of you are sitting in homes right now where the silence has weight. Where conversations happen about grocery lists and car services and water heaters and nothing real. Where your spouse has learned, very thoroughly, that certain parts of themselves are not safe with you. And you have a list. A long, organized, reasonable list of everything they are not doing right. I had that list. I had it memorized. But let me ask you something. And I want you to sit with this question rather than answer it quickly. When last did your spouse try to share something with you, and you actually stopped what you were doing, put down what you were holding, and just listened? Not to respond. Not to evaluate. Not to improve upon what they were saying. Just to receive them. Because here is what I learned on a field between life and death, kneeling at the base of a scarred tree with 9 years of my husband's prayers folded at its roots. The marriage you are frustrated with, you built it together. The distance you are blaming them for, you measured out your share of it too. And the person you keep waiting to become who you need them to be, may be exactly who God made them to be. And the question that has been quietly waiting for you is whether you are willing to love who they actually are. You do not need to almost die to change. That is the grace I want to leave with you. I needed a bathroom floor and 21 minutes on the other side of consciousness to see what you can choose to see right now. Today, before the silence gets heavier. Before another year passes where your spouse stops reaching because they have learned you will not receive it. Choose to see them. Not the version of them that exists in your frustration. Not the version that falls short of your expectations. The actual person. The one who is carrying more than you know. The one who may have been praying for your marriage in the dark while you were constructing your case against them in the light. If this testimony reached something in you today, do not let it pass. Write it down in the comments. Tell me where you are watching from. Not because I need to know your location, but because naming what you felt is the first act of honesty. And honesty is where every real change begins. I am praying for every marriage represented in these comments. I mean that. I pray over this channel. I pray over these stories. Because I know what it costs to share something this true. And I know what it means to receive something this true when your marriage is standing at the edge of something you cannot come back from. Subscribe. Stay connected. There are more testimonies coming, more stories of people who went to the edge and came back different. You are not alone in your struggle. And you are not too far gone for the truth to find you. My name is Miriam Elise Tanner. I died for 21 minutes on August 19, 2019. And the most important thing I brought back from the other side was not a vision of heaven. It was the ability to finally see my husband.